Shopify is a platform built for growth, whether you're just starting out or already running a thriving business. From managing inventory to creating a seamless checkout experience, Shopify is designed to handle it all. And it doesn't stop there. Shopify helps you sell everywhere your customers are, online or in person. It's the ultimate tool for turning big dreams into big wins. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/OPP.
Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we conclude our investigation into one of the most enigmatic disappearances in American history, Maura Murray. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Prosecutors. My name is Brett, and I am joined by my co-host, Alice.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back. This is the exciting
Hello,
conclusion.
Alice.
Hi, Brett.
Yes, we have finally reached our conclusion. I always feel like when I'm listening to a case and I really like a case, I always wish that the podcast had done one more episode. So hopefully this is the one more episode that everybody wanted.
I want it.
Well, there you go. And, this is our podcast, so we get to do what we want to do. How are you doing today, Alice?
I'm doing fantastic. I am sitting here with a cup of tea because this is like watching the conclusion of my favorite show, getting to record this with you.
There you go. I like that. I hope everybody's sharing a cup of tea with us today. True Crime Garage has their gimmick where they do a beer every show. We can't do that, or we'd be drunk by the end, and that's probably not good.
Yeah. We'll have tea or coffee. How about that?
Yeah. There you go. I had a hearing today, and I actually got to go into the courtroom. So wow. I feel like this is a big step on the end of the coronavirus quarantine. So we'll see what ends up happening. For now, we are still broadcasting from our remote locations, but, we'll see if that comes to an end soon. Either way, today we're going to finish this discussion of Maura Murray and see if we can throw out some theories about what happened to her. At this point, we've gone through pretty much everything there is to talk about in this story. I mean, that's probably an overstatement. As we've said several times, they do have a 100+ episode podcast over on Missing Maura Murray, so there are definitely other things we could talk about, but I think we've hit the most important things. I think at this point, if you've listened to our podcast, you have a pretty good idea of who Maura was and what was going on with her in this pretty short time frame where she did go missing. So tonight, or today, depending on when you're listening, we're going to go ahead and talk about some theories and the theories that people have. We've thrown out theories as we've gone along. I guess we've been pretty dismissive of those theories. Sorry if anybody had their feelings hurt. One thing, we'll never lie to you. So if we think something's stupid, we'll just say it's stupid.
I think by this point, people know that we say what we feel.
Exactly. So, just to start off with, why not start off with an absurd theory? Aliens?
And maybe not that absurd. I mean, I'm pretty sure NASA just released some UFO videos or confirmed that they were real. So
that's a good point. So there you go, doubters.
So I think aliens did it.
Yeah, aliens did it.
I think
okay,
NASA
we're
thinks
done.
aliens did it.
Okay, guys, until next time.
End of podcast. Sorry, please continue.
It is interesting, for those of you who are doubters, that one of the most famous alien abduction stories of all time, sort of a definitive alien abduction story that, if you are a doubter, you might say set the template for future stories. If you're a believer, you would just say, hey, of course it set the template because that's how they happen. The abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, which is quite famous. That abduction actually occurred in 1961, happened in the White Mountains, only about 30 miles away from where Maura vanished in a place called Franconia Notch. So, hey, maybe it was, I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens. It probably wasn't aliens. There's none of the even if you are a believer in alien abductions, there's none of the things that tend to happen with an alien abduction. Nobody saw lights in the sky. I think we can rule this one out. I wanted to go ahead and start with this just so you guys would know how thorough we are being in considering all the possibilities.
We have open minds that we shut immediately after we finish hearing them.
Exactly. And we're going to do that with aliens. Could have been aliens. It wasn't aliens.
I agree with you. I don't think it was aliens. Not that we would just automatically discount alien theories, but here there's absolutely no, accompanying sort of observations that would support it.
Right. And we're all about evidence here on the Prosecutors Podcast.
So a second theory is that Rick Forcier knows something. So Rick was an eyewitness who reported he saw a woman matching Maura's description jogging along Route 112 the night that Maura disappeared. So Rick drove on this road every single day for work because he is a contractor. And he said on this particular night, as he was approaching, the woman turned onto a dirt road. So it sounds like he was on the street, or he was driving on the road, and she was running, and he could see her. But then perhaps as, he came into view, she turned off a dirt road where he did not drive. Now, this area where he claims he saw this woman running, let me pause here really quickly. I should note that, we just looked up the temperature on this day. It was very cold. We do know Maura is a track star, and certainly running in cold weather is part of training, but it was a very cold night. So back to where he saw her. He saw a woman. He saw a woman jogging about 4 to 5 miles from the accident site. And, within running distance, especially if you are a runner. But interestingly, Rick lived on the corner of Bradley Hill Road and Wild Amanusic Road, across the road from Butch Atwood, in a trailer near where Maura had her accident. And despite being basically within that kind of perimeter of where this accident occurred, Rick denied law enforcement access to his property when they were searching for Maura. That's just interesting because he, didn't hesitate to report something he saw with regard to Maura's case, but then with his property sitting right there, and if she were to have wandered off or been taken, he's very close by, he would not let law enforcement onto his property to see if they could find anything.
Yeah, this is one of those things. There's so much to unpack in this Rick Forcier thing. And it has sort of ballooned beyond even this. I think one thing we should go ahead and address about Rick Forcier and sort of put to the side, because I don't think it deserves a lot of discussion. Over on Aaron Larkin's podcast, giving a lot of shout outs to Aaron Larkin's podcast, 107 Degrees. She did an interview with a private investigator who had been hired by the Murray family and posted that interview. And I got to tell you, that interview is basically like a law school class final exam question about slander. She has this private investigator on, and he basically says that he hired a psychic, and the psychic told him that Rick Forcier killed Maura. He also says that Rick Forcier told someone that Maura had stopped by his house wanting to have sex with him, and that they had sex, and then she went on her way and disappeared. It is like the craziest interview you're ever going to hear. I can't believe they actually published it. I can't believe Rick Forcier didn't just go ahead and sue them, because Rick Forcier is not a public person. You can't just accuse him of murder. We call that slander per se. So if he sues, he's going to win and he's going to get money.
You may have just given Rick a claim. He may not have known that.
Well, as part of the endless struggle between Aaron Larkin and James Renner has also talked to Rick Forcier about this and encouraged him to sue Aaron. So this is not the first time it's come up. And let me just go ahead and say, if Rick Forcier actually told someone, which he didn't, by the way, that Maura came by his house and wanted to have sex with him, and they had sex, and then she went on her way, then he probably did kill her. I mean, that's insane. That's a crazy story to tell. And if you told that kind of story, every law enforcement officer in the world would think you did it. There's no proof he ever said that. No one knows where this private investigator even got this story. James Renner investigated this. He actually talked to Rick Forcier's ex-wife. She rolled her eyes and said, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." So we don't know where that came from. I mean, here's the thing. I feel like if you did it, you don't want them poking around your property because they're going to find evidence. If you didn't do it, you don't want them poking around your property because you know there's nothing to find. So it's a waste of time as far as helping out Maura, but they might find something of yours that you don't want them to see. In this country, we take pretty seriously the idea that you have a right to privacy in your property. It's enshrined in the Constitution. So I think this criticism of Rick for not opening up his property so people could, search it when there's no evidence that there's anything on there to find. Look, this statement he made that he saw a woman jogging along Route 112 is really interesting. And I don't know if Rick has ever taken this back or if he stands by that statement to this day. I think it's possible that Rick just wasn't there when all the excitement went down and he kind of wanted to be a part of it and he felt like he missed out. So he said this and it wasn't really true. I think that's one possibility. Another possibility is maybe it was somebody else, I mean, a lot of people like to run. That's always a possibility. It was 4 to 5 miles away from the accident site. That's a pretty good distance. Now, what she did is consistent with what you would expect her to do if she were running away from the site. She sees somebody coming and she turns down a road.
When I go running, I try to be safe.
Right. There's a lot of explanations for this. Look, I get it. People who think Rick has something to do with this, there's evidence in other cases of people who were involved. Weirdly, it seems like people who are involved in a crime have one of two reactions. They either flee. So, one of the things that FBI profilers will look at when they're looking at a case is, did you leave town soon after something happened? That's a very common reaction. If somebody, your next door neighbor turns up dead and all of a sudden you're taking a week-long vacation that you weren't planning before, that's something the police will look at because it indicates that maybe you're trying to distance yourself from the crime. But, and this is why profiling is so difficult, the exact opposite also happens. You have people who interject themselves into a case. So you'll have people, for instance, when someone goes missing, who join the search party. And in fact, if you are ever part of a search party and you find the body, you may not know it, but you are immediately one of the police top suspects. One interesting commonality between criminals of this sort, these sort of extreme kidnap, sexual killers, a lot of them actually have a fascination with law enforcement, and they want to be a part of law enforcement. there's a famous murder made famous by Mindhunter named Ed Kemper. And Ed Kemper was the co-ed killer. He would kill people. He was a really weird guy, kind of interesting guy. He would kill people and he would cut off their heads and he would bury them face up in the garden facing his mother's room because he said his mother always wanted people to look up to her. So that's the kind of stuff he would do. And he finally just murdered his mother. And when he did, he kind of realized, hey, I've just been killing people as a surrogate for my mom this whole time. I'm done, and just turned himself in. So weird guy. But anyways, he was really interested in the police and would help the police and was sort of friends with all the police and actually was able to stay ahead of the police because of that relationship. And he always sort of had this fascination with the police. So it's one of those things, hard to explain exactly why. And a lot of people spend a lot of time analyzing the way these killers think. But it is just a commonality that they want to be involved. They want to be seen as important. They want to have that moment of fame. They want to be the one who finds the body. You also will find people who return to the scene of the crime. One of the things police will often do, I don't want to give away all their secrets to the extent these are still secret, is if you have a killing and there's a crime scene and the police are at the crime scene and, a crowd sort of gathers and they're all standing behind the police tape, the police will often take pictures of everyone who's there and run down backgrounds on those people, because another thing that often happens is the killer will return to sort of watch the aftermath of what they've done. So some people say that Rick Forcier is exhibiting part of this behavior. Like, say he killed her, and buried her in the backyard or whatever. He still wants to be part of the story. And so he's interjecting himself into it. And it also has the added benefit of it puts Maura, 4 to 5 miles away from him. So he's both part of the story and he's distancing himself from it all at once. So he kind of hits both things. But there's really no evidence that he had anything to do with this. And I think it's kind of a Cecil Smith issue where a lot of people have piled a lot of guilt on Rick Forcier without really any evidence that he did anything wrong.
Right.
One thing people say, I'll just throw this out there too, because there's just so much weird information out there. So our boy Butch Atwood, everybody seems to think he's a really great guy. Apparently he was afraid of Rick Forcier for whatever reason. At some point, people claim that Rick Forcier refinanced his house right around this time, and that about the same time, Butch Atwood moved to the coast, bought a boat, and lived in Florida for the rest of his life, which was his dream. And so, of course, people put the two together and say Butch Atwood knew that Rick Forcier killed Maura, and he paid him off so he could move to the coast. I mean, okay. If that's what you want to believe, you can believe that.
He does live in a trailer, so, for him to have that amount of money.
Right. I don't know exactly how much money Rick got out of this whole refinance deal, and I don't know if it was enough to put Butch Atwood up in the lap of luxury down in Florida. I think more likely Butch and his wife had been saving money for their entire lives, and they did like millions of other people and retired to Florida. Butch Atwood he's no longer with us, but in future interviews, I mean, he never wavered from the story that we've told you about his interactions with Maura and what he knew about her and her disappearance. So another theory, we've addressed this briefly, but we'll just go ahead and run through it again, is that someone else was in the car with her. You have Faith Westman's 911 call that she saw someone smoking a cigarette. People say, and I get it, that smoking cigarettes is a very definitive thing. It has a specific look to it, and they just question whether or not you could really mistake a cell phone light, like the little red light on a cell phone, for the end of a cigarette. I mean, I get that, but she was a ways away. She's doing the best she can. And once again, Butch Atwood didn't see anyone. There is a store clerk that claims to have seen someone matching Maura's description that night, and that she was accompanied by 2 young women similar age. Some people have theorized, and I think even James Renner has theorized, that this is part of the whole tandem driving thing, and that these were potentially her friends that we talked about earlier that she had the party with, who were driving up with her. But even that theory, they're not in the car with Maura; they're in a different car, and there's no way to really confirm that. God bless him, James Renner. His whole theory is Maura is working with a battered women's group, and they're sort of helping her do this escape. I mean, once again, there's nothing about the way Maura has lived her life that would make you believe that she's going to do this. I mean, she gets into a car wreck with her father's car a couple days before, and what does she do? She doesn't run away from him. She goes to his hotel room. So the notion that she would have just disappeared, even if she was terrified of Billy, I just can't buy it. And I just see no reason to believe it. And I think it's one reason that even James Renner has moved away from that theory. And we'll just go ahead and tell you what his new theory is. Might as well just go ahead and address that. His new theory is essentially that Maura was escaping. Billy did not murder her that night, but when he came up for the search, he was able to locate her in the days after her disappearance. He murdered her then and got away with it. I mean, that's essentially his theory. And there's literally no way to test that theory. It's just, completely pulled out of thin air. So maybe not.
In other words, for our prosecutor barometer, you can't prosecute a case like that.
No. And this whole theory is based on Billy's had some legal troubles recently that do involve some very serious accusations about things he has done with other women in recent years. But evidence rule number one is you can't prosecute somebody for one crime based solely on evidence that they committed a different crime and say, hey, he did this really bad thing over here. He must have killed Maura too.
Here, there doesn't seem to be any evidence.
Yeah, it's really one of the most interesting things about evidence law, actually. Maybe one day we'll do a whole show on 404B and that rule of evidence and how you get that stuff in. It actually is really interesting.
Yes, it is.
So maybe we'll do that one day.
Yeah.
We'll put it aside for now, but one day. If that's something that would interest you, let us know and we'll do a show on it.
There is a very popular theory that Maura went to the White Mountains to commit suicide.
And if you look at that list of things she had in her car, she did have sleeping pills. And I believe one of the boxes of sleeping pills is empty. So the theory is kind of, in those few moments, she took what was left of the sleeping pills and took that with her when she grabbed her alcohol.
Yeah. Or she's really bad at throwing away trash, which I am sometimes.
And Fred's expressed a lot of regret. He also said some of those things to the police, and the police really seized on that. And he's felt for a long time. And I think probably not, I understand why he feels this way, but it's probably not true that nobody really looked for Maura because, well, her dad said she killed herself, so she can do that. Why are we going to waste our resources? He regrets that. Look, I think this is one of those things where the evidence indicates that Maura did not go up there to kill herself. Is it possible that this was sort of, the last thing in a string of things that had happened to her, and in that moment, she snapped and decided to kill herself? I guess that's possible. I just don't think it's likely.
So the next theory I'll call the A-frame house theory. And this kind of reads like a movie. So John Smith was someone that helped the Murray family for over a decade in trying to figure out for the family what happened to Maura. And he presented evidence to the documentary crew of Missing Maura Murray that two local brothers by the name of Moulton had something to do with Maura's disappearance. He goes actually further and suggests that one of these men lived in an A-frame house about a mile from the crash site where Maura crashed her car, and local rumors suggest Maura was actually murdered in that A-frame house. Now, what does he base this on? Well, so he says that Fred Murray, remember Maura's dad, told Smith that Larry Moulton had mailed him a knife he said he'd found in in his brother Claude's glove compartment box, which had traces of blood on it. So, apparently, police initially rejected Fred's offer of the knife as new evidence, but they later accepted it. Just generally, I would find that kind of hard to believe, because if in fact there was a knife being mailed to the father of, Maura, it seems to me like the police would accept it unless there was some reason not to believe that this was somehow tied to Maura. But that's just my side commentary.
Yeah, the police have always been very, very close hold on information about this case.
We don't know if this knife actually exists or if Fred actually received this in the mail, because law enforcement has never disclosed whether they are in possession of the knife or if there was blood on it or if it was tested for DNA. In another podcast, we've talked about holdback evidence. So just because law enforcement hasn't talked about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But what we have right now, best information to us is there's no knife that we know of.
I would think that even if they didn't admit the existence of the knife, and even if they didn't want to say Maura's DNA was on it, that they would at least tell the family Maura was murdered. Like we can't tell you how we know, but we have proof that Maura was murdered, and we're going to do everything we can to find who did it.
Now, this does sound like an appealing theory, though, for those who think Maura has been murdered. So some other people, not the police that we know of, have actually done some independent investigation. So in 2006, the new owners of the A-frame house allowed Smith to inspect the interior of the home that they now owned. And apparently 2 cadaver dogs got a big hit off the upstairs closet for human remains, and carpet samples were given to the New Hampshire State Police. This is all according to Smith. The floors have since been replaced, so there are no more carpet samples today to be able to test. And again, this is one of those situations where law enforcement has not commented on whether they have any carpet samples or whether they've been tested. So this is all just going off Smith's statements. We don't know if, in fact, these are they exist. Now, that was in 2006. 10 years later, in 2016, Smith returns to this A-frame house. He's very focused on this A-frame house. And it's now abandoned, actually, so no one lives there. And he takes the hosts of the Missing Maura Murray podcast. And there, Smith and the hosts of the podcast observe what they think is blood on the wood panel walls inside the upstairs closet. Smith said, "We actually took wood chips from that closet, and I have those in my possession." Smith says he gave the wood chips to the documentary crew, who had them examined by a molecular geneticist. Oh no, I'm going to mispronounce this again. Okay, I'm going to give my best shot. Dr. Max Noradine?
Sounds good to me.
I'm going to go with Noradine.
The 2D. The 2D is really kind of throw you over.
The way it spelled, it could be
Noradine. I kind of like Noradine.
Noradine. Dr. N.
It must be Noradine.
This molecular geneticist who applied, another word I can't pronounce. Okay, I'm gonna give it a go. For all of you, I will give it a go. He applied
phenolphthalein.
Phenolphthalein. Oh, that's very wrong.
We're not dumb people, I promise. We can't pronounce things, but I promise we're smart. We really are.
He applied some chemical to it to see whether it was actually blood. And all the geneticists could say was that the substance turned pink, which indicates that there's presence of blood. But that's all it can tell you. Whether that blood is related to Maura remains to be determined. And the samples have been sent off for DNA testing. So this little bit of wood chip DNA has been sent off for further testing. But remember, now it's many, many, many years later. It's quite degraded. And science does have its limits, at least currently. So one interesting piece of the puzzle is that forensic scientist Lori Baker determined that the blood did come from a human, not an animal. And not only did it test positively for blood, but for the blood of 2 different human beings. Baker goes on to say that we know you have a DNA from humans and you actually have the DNA from 2 different people. And she was able to tell that one of the contributors to the DNA sample is definitely a male, but the other one is undetermined. So to Baker, this leaves open the possibility that the other DNA that's undetermined, whether it's male or female, could actually be Maura's blood. Now, this information was passed along to the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit, but they decided that the samples were just too degraded to determine any other specific characteristics beyond what Baker said. So, despite the fact that they can't make any more findings about the sample, they did assign 3 task forces to look deeper into Maura's disappearance. So, maybe they do have additional holdback evidence that lets them think that they can crack this case with more manpower. I don't know. I don't think any of us know. And maybe one day these samples can tell us more, but that's all we know now. And I have to take a step back for a second. I know we're talking about this as a theory, but this also could be nothing to do with Maura. It could be someone else's blood or human DNA altogether. But because it is close to the crash site, of course, it's possible that Maura was murdered. This has become a very popular theory, especially because Smith, who's been working with the Murray family, has really honed in on this possibility.
And maybe one day, as DNA develops and as new techniques are developed to test DNA, we'll have some success here. We've seen that in other cases where 20 years ago, you needed a much larger sample to be able to test. And now you can test those samples. And you see that in cases where people are actually let out of prison because it's determined that they didn't do it. So there's hope here. There's hope that one day we'll be able, frankly, to rule out the A-frame house. I think it would be truly remarkable if it turned out that Maura was killed there. And there's so many different things coming together in this A-frame house case. You have the dogs. People love dogs. I love dogs. I have a dog. They're great. And they can be very helpful if used correctly. But a dog can't tell you why it's reacting the way it is. And, cadaver dogs are particularly difficult because it is true that the chemical composition of, the substance that they react to last for a really long time. So a dog can tell you if a cadaver was present, decades before. The problem with that is, a lot of people die in houses. I have heard, and I've never been able to confirm it, that people have died in this A-frame house. So it's hard to say what the dog is reacting to. The DNA, the blood, you bleed in your house a lot. Things happen. You cut your hand, you nick yourself shaving. It's not that hard to come up with reasons there would be blood. Now, it is interesting that you have 2 different types of blood, but we don't even know if it was at the same time, right? Like, we don't know if one person, cut their finger and got some blood in that closet 20 years ago, and then 10 years later, somebody else did. We just know so little about the circumstances of this that it's really hard to tie anything to it. Having said that, the A-frame house is really the focus of a lot of investigation, as you can tell just from the discussion we just had. And it really is the only place where you're getting any kind of new information. This is a really old case. You're just not going to see a lot of new information. So people have focused on it a lot for that reason. And I think the Missing Maura Murray guys, I know they've been raising money for ground penetrating radar, which I think they're going to use around the A-frame house to try and determine whether anybody was buried there, that kind of thing. So there is a lot of focus on this.
And to note, we've shot down a lot of theories. I don't think this is a ridiculous theory. It's just unfortunate that there isn't more evidence. So we just don't know enough.
And there's so much that's intriguing about this. I believe this house is on like a little offshoot called Old Peters Road or something along those lines. And you can just imagine, Maura, like, let's just say she wanted to get away from the crash site. And so she's going down the road, and she also needs to get off the road because she doesn't want somebody to come along and see her and put two and two together. So she's running along and she sees this little road running off to the side. Maybe she darts down it. And on that road is the A-frame house. And things happen. Somebody sees her. Maybe she knocks on the door. You can sort of imagine all sorts of Texas Chainsaw Massacre type things at this point, right? And she's murdered and she's buried in the basement and nobody knows. That could have happened. Like Alice said, that's not crazy. The problem is without more evidence, it really is just speculation at this point. So the local legend, we'll deal with the local legend now. This is one that Fred Murray has said really intrigues him, and it's the Loon Mountain 3. Now, I have skied on Loon Mountain, so I feel like I know something about this. But there's local speculation, and who knows where this came from. And it sort of has the air of legend about it to me, that there were three young men who worked on Loon Mountain, and that they were coming back from work, and they lived nearby, and as they're driving along, they see Maura. Maura flags them down, and she gets into the car with them. Now, what happened at that point, there are sort of different stories. One is that they were like, hey, just come back to our place and stay the night. You know, we'll have a party or whatever. And they went back and they were drinking and maybe they were taking drugs, and she overdosed on something and died, and they had to hide the body. People say that these three men did not report to work the next day. And so that sort of leads to the idea that something horrible had happened the night before and they had to deal with it. So I'm not going to name any of the people who who have been speculated to be a part of this Loon Mountain 3, going back to slander, but there are people who've been identified by others as potentially having been involved in this. There's a red truck that comes up a lot if you listen to this story. I told you earlier about the woman who said that she saw Maura there with a couple other women. Well, she also said that Maura didn't want to go outside, the woman that she saw didn't want to go outside because there was a red truck that was sort of behaving oddly, and she thought maybe they were up to no good. There are people who say that members of this Loon Mountain 3 owned a red truck, and so they tie it in that way as well. Now, look, the problem with this is I'm not going to say what people are saying in the community can obviously be very valuable for an investigation, particularly when the story is that multiple people did something. As we've said before, one person can barely keep a secret. Two people hardly ever keep a secret. If you got three, somebody's talking. And so the idea is somebody talked to the wrong person, it got around the community, and now we know. This, like I said, even Fred Murray is interested in this. He's heard this story. He'd like to know more about it. Other than knowing this story is out there, we have no idea whether it has any substance. We don't know whether the police have looked into it. We don't know whether these people even exist. So until we know more, this is kind of just one of those things people talk about. If these guys did it, that's how we may actually get closure in this case, because if these guys did it and this story is out there and these task force officers are looking into this, I think they'll crack the case. I think one of these people will break and they'll talk and we'll all finally know what happened. So, there's reason to sort of root for the Loon Mountain 3 theory, because I think it's one of the few theories where after 20 years or whatever, you might finally get the story, disappearance of Maura Murray, solved. So that was one reason I wanted to talk about it, even though there's very little evidence to back it up.
And I just wanted to know, I respect you for not saying their names, because that is something really frustrating, I think, as someone in the law enforcement arena, whether as a prosecutor or an officer. When people start throwing names around willy-nilly, it really damages lives, as we've seen in our own cases and also in some of the cases we've discussed on this podcast. So when we think someone's worth mentioning, we certainly do. But when there's just no evidence of someone, there's no reason to kind of throw their name under the bus, because, again, we're dealing with real people's lives.
Exactly. And I think it's important to just always remember that. And we've talked about that a lot in this case, and we've talked about it in other cases. To the extent you cannot involve people who who may very well have nothing to do with something into a case, you should do it. With Forcier, it's a little different because arguably he's part of the case already. So I think it's fine to talk about him. I think it's a little crazy to go out and accuse him of killing Maura. But yeah, I just think as a community, we need to be more sensitive about that and just do a better job.
Preach. So what do you think happened to her, Brett?
Well, I sort of have two answers to that question. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what you think happened, and then I'm going to
sure.
Actually, how about I'll give my one answer, and then I'll give my more sort of far-fetched answer after that.
Sure.
Well, if you look at what was going on with Maura, and I think people forget this, and I think even people aren't aware of how quickly all of these events in her life happened. She's caught with the stolen credit card. I mean, put aside even the West Point stuff. She's come to Amherst. She's caught with the stolen credit card in the fall of 2003. She gets 3 months probation for that. I'm sure that was very embarrassing for her. I'm sure her family was very upset with her. Then in February, in very quick succession, she has some bad things happen to her. She has, just assuming that there's no conspiracy here and just the things that we've been told are true, best case scenario, she is very upset about what's happening with her sister and the fact that her sister is returning to alcohol. Immediately after that, she wrecks her father's new car. She disappoints him again. Literally a couple days later, she's involved in another accident after what is an incredibly bad decision to drive her malfunctioning car up into the White Mountains when it's been snowing and there's ice on the roads and it's dark. It was just a terribly stupid thing to do. She wrecks her car. She's probably been drinking. In that moment, I've got to think the only thing Maura could think is, I have got to get away from here. I think she tried to restart the car. It didn't work. I think Butch Atwood came by and said, hey, do you want me to call the police? She asked him not to, but she's not stupid. She assumes the police are coming. Either he's going to call, somebody else is going to call, or the police are just going to come by. So I think, it's weird that she grabbed the alcohol. It's difficult for me to explain why she chose those things, but she grabs her backpack and she grabs, I guess, the things that matter to her most, throws them in the backpack, and then I think she heads out. The dogs talk about, or the dogs don't talk, but people talk about the dogs tracking her for, 100 yards away from the call. Just want to go back to what I was saying earlier about the problem with dogs. They're tracking her on the road. If you've ever lived in New England in the winter, you know that you've got plows going up and down those roads all the time. And they're not only plowing the road, they're also dumping sand, salt, and chemicals on the road. I don't think you can take a lot from those dogs. I think those dogs smelled her around her car, where probably her scent was the greatest. And I think, frankly, past that on those roads, it's going to be almost impossible to follow her. But I think she did head that way. I think she headed down the road. And honestly, I kind of feel like she, at some point, decided, I've got to get off the road. And she went into the forest. People talk about there not being footprints in the snow. A couple things about that. She didn't necessarily go into the forest right next to her car. And number two, we're not talking about like nice fluffy powder on the sides of the road here. We're talking about piles of ice that have been piled up by those same plows. So she probably didn't actually leave footprints when she left the road. I think she went off into the woods. I think in her mind, she thought, I'm going to hunker down somewhere in these woods, hang out until the morning, go back to my car and take care of this. And I know people are not going to be satisfied with this, but I kind of think she crawled into a hole somewhere, covered herself up, and froze to death in the night. And she's still there. I think she's still there within, a few miles of where she disappeared. And people just underestimate how difficult it is to find someone in a forest. These are big forests. Unless you literally and you talk to search experts and how searches are done when they're done correctly, the way you find people is you basically just stumble upon them. You have enough people who can cover enough ground where somebody walks right into where the body is. Until that happens, I don't think they'll find Maura. And frankly, with the accumulation of years and years of detritus and leaves and everything else, I don't think they'll ever find her. But I think that's basically what happened, with a caveat that I'll add after Alice, you give us your theory.
Okay. So I think we have a lot of points of agreement, but ultimately what happened to her, or how she got away from the car, I disagree with you. So I agree that, as we've been talking, it was a tough year, and it happened all in quick succession. I think some things
Can I
that
add
are
one
often,
thing?
Yeah.
I hate to interrupt you, but I just want to add one thing, because I've been coming back to it over and over again, but I didn't say it, and I want to say it. She'd been drinking quite a bit, it seems like, over the course of these days, but she had not been sleeping. And I think that was part of it. I think she was not only potentially drinking, I think she was tired. I think she was tired and she was stressed and she just wasn't thinking clearly. And so she may have done things that people sitting in their chairs listening to this podcast think she would never do that.
As a parent of a new baby, I can say that not sleeping definitely affects your judgment.
Yes.
I mean, isn't there's that study that like sleepless nights, you end up driving or having the judgment and reaction time of someone who is under the influence.
Right.
And so it's incredibly dangerous to drive having not slept, or make any sort of judgments. So I do think that's worth noting, that she doesn't seem to sleep in the days leading up to this particular event. And having been in stressful situations, I don't sleep when I'm stressed either. So that's also understandable. If she did wander off, she would be relatively close to that site. And I think that there's been so much attention on her search and her disappearance that I do think someone would have found her by this point. And I hear what you're saying, that it's really hard to find someone who crawls up into a hole, but she knew it was freezing that night. We said the low was 7 degrees. That's really cold. Her judgment may have been impaired, but it only takes a couple minutes in that type of weather to realize, oh, crud, I made the wrong decision, and to turn back and find some shelter. I know, because I've lived in those types of temperatures before, and there have been times where I think I'm just going to go out to my car and make sure, the windshield wipers are up so they don't get stuck if it's snowing down, and I turn around when it's that cold. I'm like, never mind. I'm not going to do what I'm always going to do because it's too cold. And it doesn't take me long. It takes me from my front door steps to my driveway, which is a matter of seconds. So I don't think she's close by. I think she got driven further away. Now, the next part of my theory, if I think she got into a car and she was driven away from the scene, I don't think she's still alive. And the reason is, I don't think she necessarily wanted to disappear forever. So if she were still alive, I think she would have reappeared because she wanted to be in her life. She did not want to disappear forever. Or someone would have seen her at this point. Again, there's so much attention on this. If she were trying to run away to Canada and start a new life, I think someone would have noticed and seen her and reported it, even if it were months or years later. So that leads me to, if she's not alive, she's dead, and I don't think that she killed herself, then my theory kind of is left with one option. I think she was killed. By whom? I don't know. I don't even necessarily know if it's by the person she got into the car with, but I don't think she's alive, and I don't think she killed herself. So I do think she was murdered.
I'll say this. I don't know exactly what happened, but I think either what I said happened or what you said happened. I think one thing we can be absolutely sure of when you look at everything that we know about the case is she wasn't going to disappear. She wasn't going to kill herself. She was going up there just to have a couple days. I think she wanted to go up there, stay in a room for a little while, drink some, relax, and then she was going back to Amherst. I think that's what was happening. And
I agree.
When that wreck happened, the most important thing was to get away. She had to get away because she knew if she was found at the site of that wreck, she was going to get a DUI, and it was really going to be bad for her. Then you are looking at a situation where her credit card fraud all of a sudden becomes a big deal. You get 3 months probation where you're supposed to be acting on good behavior, and you get in a car wreck when you've been drinking. She would not have wanted that to happen. And I absolutely believe, and actually, I go back and forth. I change my mind like weekly on this about whether she went into the woods or she got in a car. But I think one of those things happened.
And can I add to that what you were just saying? The little things in her life that were going wrong would have been magnified with a DUI, and so you end up making bad choices. I want to say that we actually see that situation all the time when people are on probation or supervised release after they've been sentenced for a crime, and maybe the crime is something on the smaller side, right? They didn't kill anyone, they didn't rob a store, maybe they did something smaller, and so their sentence is light. But then we see them they violate their probation somehow with something stupid, like you didn't call your probation officer. And then that ends up being a bigger deal because they lie about it. And because they lied about it, which is not a big deal to forget to call someone, it kind of snowballs because of their rap sheet. And so I can imagine her thinking, this is just going to make everything so much worse.
Right. And I think if a car came by with, a Ted Bundy type, just somebody who looks normal, no reason to think there's anything wrong with them, and they slowed down and said, hey, do you need a ride? She'd have jumped in without a second thought. So yeah, I think she could have been killed. Especially
because it was that cold.
It was cold and she needed to get away. So I think that's absolutely a possibility. And I think it's a strong possibility. And I think it really is one of those two things. I think those are really the only viable options for what happened to her. She either walked off into the woods or somebody picked her up in a car. I don't think it was anybody nearby. I think if it was somebody nearby, the police would know by now. It's one reason the Loon 3 thing's kind of intriguing, because it's sort of a variant on this where, and in that, you'd feel even more safe because it's not one person. There are 3 people in the car, and you think, well, at least one of them has to be nice. They're not going to let the other 2 kill me or whatever. And especially if they were her age, she would just get in and go with them. And then whatever happened, happened.
And with that in mind, if it was the person who was driving the car who murdered her, I think it was opportunistic rather than someone who'd been tracking her. To defeat some other theories that we were talking about previously. I think this person just happened to be passing through and, wow, this happened. I don't think she'd actually been stalked or been followed by anyone or been watching, like the Rick Forcier theory. I don't think someone was watching her and then targeted her to
and
be
there
murdered.
Obviously are people who are murdered that way where people stalk them, but frankly, far, far more likely is someone who's looking to kill somebody, sees somebody who's vulnerable and they take advantage of it. I think that is the most likely story if she was murdered, is it was just somebody, she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you can say, what are the chances? But many, 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 many people who are murdered every day in this country, that's why.
And also, like we said previously, this is an extraordinary case. It hasn't been solved. She disappeared in minutes. So while it may sound, crazy, I think we have to consider it.
And so now I'm going to give you my conspiracy theory that I like to believe.
Give me your conspiracy theory.
We told you conspiracy theories don't happen. This is my conspiracy theory. It's a small conspiracy, though, because there's not really a conspiracy. I think that Maura hit Patrick Vassy that night. I think that it was a slow night. She got in her car. She needed to go get something and get back quickly. I think she was speeding down the road. She didn't see him. He's drunk. He's stumbling along. She hits him, freaks out. She goes back. She has her catatonic event. I think the next day she calls her father and says, hey, this awful thing has happened. I need your help. He tells her, act normal. I'll be down there tomorrow. He goes to the ATMs. He picks up the money. He comes down. They can't find a car that day, or maybe they don't have enough money that day. For whatever reason, he's talked about this fact, he had a job he had to do the next week, so he had to leave. He couldn't stay. I think it's even possible that he left her some money and said, hey, take the car, get out of town for a week, go up to the White Mountains, stay for a week. I'll come back next weekend. We'll get a new car and we'll take care of this. And that's why she went up there. And that's what she was doing. Now, we're never going to be able to prove this, right? You'll never be able to prove that she hit Patrice Vassy. But the thing people say about the reason she didn't is they say that the paint that was on Patrice Vassy does not match her car. And I want to go through that real quick. I pulled the accident record. James Renner, another thing James Renner has contributed to this case, James Renner was able to get a copy of the accident record from the Patrice Vassy case. And so I pulled that down and took a look at it because I kept hearing that Renner had gotten a copy of this and that it proves that Maura wasn't involved. First, I want to go through what it says, and then I want to go through what James Renner said it says. Because part of it's redacted, but he's seen an unredacted version. So just going through the close, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. This will be on the website, the prosecutorspodcast.com. It goes through his clothes, and it notes where paint is present. On his jeans is the first item. On his jeans, one very small paint chip, less than 1/2 millimeter, was noted, right? Now, first thing I want to say about that, if that's what we're going on, one small paint chip, less than 1/2 millimeter, it actually doesn't tell us anything. If you know anything about accidents, you know, it's not like the police go in there with, the Zamboni machine and clean up every bit of debris. There probably were other wrecks in that area. There would be debris, paint, glass, all on that road. So if that's literally all we have, I don't even think it tells us much of anything. But let's go on. It says the paint chip consists of 3 layers. That is then redacted. I will come back to that in a second. The next item, his belt. The report notes no paint was noted on the belt. The next item, cellular phone. No paint was noted on the phone. White t-shirt. No paint was noted. Another white t-shirt, as he was wearing multiple white t-shirts. No paint was noted. A white tank top. No paint was noted. A black and gray hooded sweatshirt. This is the only other place we find anything you can even call paint. And it's described as a few spherical pieces of glass and yellow chunks of apparent paint. But it concludes, what anyone would conclude, that those items are common to reflective road paint. So that paint almost certainly came from the road. So let's back up here. The only paint that's present on his clothes is one tiny paint chip. And on the basis of that, people have said, well, she couldn't have been involved because the paint makes it obvious that it wasn't her. And in my mind, I was thinking like most hit and runs where there's a ton of paint. If you've ever been involved in an accident, they call it swapping paint in NASCAR. If 2 cars hit each other or if a car hits somebody, they typically are going to leave some paint. So it's sort of remarkable that there's so little here. But here's the thing that blew my mind when I found out about it. So I started looking. What is this paint? This one tiny piece of paint that everybody says is conclusive that it wasn't Maura. Now remember, Maura has a black car, a black Saturn. James Renner has said that the paint colors that were redacted in the report were red, white, and metallic silver.
So not black.
But you know what is red, metallic silver, and I bet has a white base? The emblem on a Saturn.
Whoa, that's deep.
And when I saw this, it was like, I got like chills because as soon as I saw those colors, I thought to my wife's Saturn and that emblem. And if you look at Maura's, and so then I'm immediately like Googling Maura's car to see. And there it is, the emblem on the front of her car, on the bumper where you expect it to be, right where if you were standing in front of her and she hit you, she would hit you in, that area, the jeans, the belt top area. And I think it could just be from that. And frankly, how many red metallic chrome cars do you know anyway? And it's such a small paint chip that it would almost need to come from something like that, where you have the red and the chrome next to each other. And like I said, I bet the base on those emblems is white paint. So I'm not saying she hit Patrice Vassy. I think she hit Patrice Vassy. And I think that's what started all of this. And I think her father knows that. And I think it's the reason that all these years he's been adamant that what happened that led up to her leaving doesn't matter. We shouldn't talk about that and we shouldn't look into it. I think it's the reason for a very unusual thing he did. I mean, I say it's unusual. It's probably not that unusual, but it's something people have grabbed onto, including James Renner, where he does a face-to-camera plea. And he says to her, just come back. We'll deal with it like we've always dealt with it. Right? And I think he's talking to her just in case she did run away and saying, it'll be okay. We're going to be able to handle this. We have a plan.
Which is why, so first of all, Brett, that was some incredible investigative work. That's the first time I've ever heard that theory. So that was amazing. Thanks for enlightening me.
Well, thank you, Alice.
but you know what you just said when her dad made the plea, that's why I think she was murdered and that she didn't just disappear. But
because she would have come back.
I think she would have come back. Yeah,
if she were still alive.
Yeah.
I think you're right. You're right.
Because, you know, if your
no
dad's
evidence.
saying, and her dad has taken care of things in the past, you know, and
Right.
if you're like, okay, everything's going to be okay, you know, and time and distance also makes problems smaller. So if she were to get away and kind of reflect on it and be like, okay, I didn't kill him, this and this, I can come back now. So I do think she's
Right.
dead.
And there's just no evidence this breakdown in their relationship that folks like James Renner rely on. It seems like she was still very close to her father. And if she had been alive out there and he had said that, I think you're absolutely right. She would have come back. So I think that basically wraps up our investigation. I think we've done some good work illuminating some things and maybe throwing out some theories that you haven't heard before, or maybe putting a new light on some of those theories. I do want to say, the investigation is ongoing in Maura Murray. If you have any information, you can call the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit. Their telephone number is 603-223-3856. If you don't have any information, but you just want to complain or even rarely tell us we did a good job, hit us up on our email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for Twitter and Instagram, and then obviously our website, prosecutorspodcast.com. And we're going to have several different things. We draw from a lot of different sources when we do these stories. And we're going to try and put all those up there so you can read sort of the firsthand stories, the firsthand newspaper reports, any medical reports, or this report that James Renner was able to get a hold of about the Patrice Vassy incident. We're going to put all that up there on the website.
We're not trying to be smoke and mirrors,
That's 100% right. There's no case, even the guys on Missing Maura Murray, who, like I said, they've been doing this for years and they're on episode 100 or whatever. They're not experts on every aspect of this case. And there are going to be parts of this case that different people are fascinated with. And so we're going to get things wrong. We're going to misspeak, or just have the wrong information. So if you guys know something we don't know, or if we've got something wrong and you want to correct it, let us know. Shoot us an email, and we'll be happy to take that up on one of our follow-up episodes down the road.
Thank you guys so much. And we can't wait to welcome you back next time. Until then, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And we are the prosecutors.
All right. You want to talk about Rick
sorry.
Forcier?
For some reason, I thought you were saying. Who always the slacker of the two of us. So, a second theory, stop laughing at me, operating on plenty of sleep because my child sleeps, he doesn't. And by a molecular geneticist, Dr. Max Noureddin? Just for kicks. It could also be pronounced Noureddin, like iodine.
Find yourself looking for a new job or change in career? Monster.com is here to help. We are not only here to bring you job postings, but also AI interview prep and salary tools, expert career advice, and top-notch resume services. We've got everything you need to land your perfect job fit. Discover the magic of finding the ideal job with Monster.com. Your future starts now. Visit Monster.com today. Your next job opportunity is just a click away.
If you're looking to streamline your audio advertising buys and maximize your revenue, look no further than Triton Digital's programmatic audio advertising exchange, A2X. The private exchange consists of only licensed broadcasters and top-tier internet radio publishers, assuring the quality inventory and brand safety you can trust. Visit www.tritondigital.com to learn more.